So I'm looking at government stress test. That's the category. And I want to see how things play out. Obviously, stress test should be fairly central here. I'm just sort of seeing if there's a way in which, if we play around, it does sort of maintain its centrality. And it looks like it does. One of the things that, obviously I'm testing to see the extent to which things like America, which I know is associated with, some of the banks. It's just sort of double checking that. Let's see. I think it also has some connections with some of the central financial institutions, but we'll see once we see the output. So you can see that if we zoom down here, it really is sort of focusing on the banks. You see Citigroup, you see Bank of America. So the term America right here is certainly associated with specific banks, or at least the two banks that seem to be most involved in this discussion around stress test. So I'm just going to remove that, drag this back down, and I want to be able to sort of see to what extent some of these things will sort of group together nicely. I think we've got a fairly good arrangement here. It seems to be stable. It doesn't seem to be moving around a lot. So I think we've got what we want. And I'm going to change the threshold, and we'll see to what extent we've got sort of more primary patterns beginning to emerge. So I'm going to shrink this a bit so that we can see it all. You can see something like this is referring to the 19 largest banks in the U.S. We see that Treasury is really out here, part of the regulator and federal government. You see it beginning to move around. It seems to be sort of more naturally aligned in this category. And you can see what, as you sort of pull some of these linguistic components out, you can actually see how to what extent they form stable clusters. Now what's really interesting here is that stress test and government are really the core anchors of this particular category. What is very telling is that bank is front and center. So the bank discussion really is central to all of this. And while government is certainly an element of the conversation, the main discourse is around banks. And that confirms something intuitively that I would think that most people would at least recognize. But what's also important is the extent to which stress test is almost perceived as directly tied to a discourse around the banks and the financial institutions and less about government. And I think that's an important thing to understand, particularly if you're trying to enter into this discussion and position sort of key symbols that you want to use to spin it in the direction that you think is appropriate. Now, if we go into something like regulator, let's just sort of have a look to see what jumps out here. We should see something that gives us a better sense of how regulator falls in here. So we see obviously Treasury, which is understandable because we already see a connection to Treasury. So it reaffirms the relationship between bank and term regulator. Tell, there's not a lot here, but we can certainly see what that is. I think it might have to do with reporting, and we'll see what pops out when we look more deeply into tell. As we get into some of these more peripheral linguistic connections, you see fewer and fewer counts. So shade with this source, keep, Bernanke, raise, tell. So these are the elements that are sort of surrounding tell. You can see that they're starting to spin and fall into alignment, and they'll tend to be able to sort of speed these up a bit here. some of these off. Now, another thing obviously is just to have a look exactly what is in here. And we can see obviously the 19th and largest banks, big banks, large banks. America, we already know that we click into America, we get the association between Bank of America and Citibank, and obviously U.S. banks. Now let's just check here just to confirm that this isn't mentioning specific banks, but I think it has more to do with the national boundaries. We'll see that in a minute. So the bank core actually pops up here, but we see here more large, but we also see a fair number of what are called sort of central government type agencies or organizations. This gives us a good way of being able to understand how the conversations are formed and some of the key underlying elements that create the language around this particular issue. In this case, we're looking at stress tests, and more specifically, stress test as is associated with government.